Howdy, and welcome to my list of top 18 Clint Eastwood movies. Before I start this video, I want to quickly outline some precursor disclaimers about this list. For this list, I've only chosen movies that feature Clint Eastwood as a leading actor. I know that he also directed movies that did not have him playing a character, such as Mystic River and American Sniper, but Clint Eastwood has always been primarily known as a leading man. And I imagine a lot of you watching this video would be expecting this list to be about Clint Eastwood as an actor. Besides, I've never seen Mystic River or American Sniper. Throughout my lifetime, I have watched a total of 35 Clint Eastwood movies, and there are a number of movies of his that I had considered featuring on this list if I chose to extend it to a top 20 or a top 25, but I chose not to because I found them too inconsistent, or I just don't like them enough to list them on here as recommendation. All of these movies that I have got on this list are the ones I do recommend to anyone out there, whether it is hardcore Clint Eastwood movie fans or just regular moviegoers. I suspect some of you would not like some choices of this list or the way it is ordered, but this is my personal list and my personal set of opinions. As Clint once said, opinions are like assholes, everyone's got one. I'm not claiming this is a definitive list of the best Clint Eastwood movies ever. They are just movies of his that I most enjoyed watching in my lifetime. Alright, starting off at number 18 is Thunderbolt and Lightfoot from 1974. Seen this choice? Its basic storyline is quite generic. It's to do with a bank robbery by a group of criminals, but it's a consistently decent movie. There isn't much I can complain about. It's got some wild and crazy situations, and the central cast really carries this film through. You have Clint, you have Jeff Bridges, you have George Kennedy, who I personally think really stole the show playing a hard-as-nails criminal. He was really charismatic. And his sidekick was played by Jeffrey Lewis, who was a regular actor in Clint's movies. Nothing to write home about, but the 2 times I watched it, I enjoyed it. Number 17 is Kelly's Heroes from 1970. I suppose it's kind of like The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Both movies are about guys adventuring to find buried golden treasure in the backdrop of a war setting, but here it's set in World War II instead. It's quite a long movie, and I think the last act of the film drags on a bit, but it is pretty good overall, and the cast is very good. Clint is good as usual, but Telly Savalas and Donald Sutherland stole the show. And look out for Harry Dean Stanton in an early role. Number 16, this will be controversial to put here on this spot because it is so famous. This is Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad and the Ugly from 1968. A lot of the best of Clint Eastwood movies list that I looked at tend to cite it as being one of the very best, and sometimes the best. I like this movie, but I think it's overrated. When I first saw it when I was about 14 years old, and this was the first Clint Eastwood movie I've watched, at the time, I was blown away by its ambitious, operatic look to the film. The environments were incredibly rich, the extras looked really natural. It was almost like a world of its own. And of course, Ennio Morricone's Hallmark soundtrack. Really enjoyed it when I was younger, but as the years go by and I watch more of Clint Eastwood movies, including the ones that I like a lot better than this one, I gradually found this movie to be more style than substance. There isn't much of a story if you look at it. It is basically about 3 guys competing with each other in their treasure hunt for buried gold with the backdrop of the American Civil War. I thought the story dragged on in many places when it didn't need to. It's 3 hours long, and half the time the film felt like it didn't really know where it was going with all of the scenes to do with the Civil War. It was like 2 completely different stories were existing in the same movie. But nevertheless, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is really held up by the shoulders of the fantastic charismatic main actors, Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef and Ellie Wallace. They are all great in this movie. The movie has a number of classic individual scenes and a lot of directorial flair in the mix from Sergio Leone. It has all of the right ingredients, but the story structure I personally think wasn't good enough to hold the story together. Sergio Leone's later movie Once Upon a Time in the West I thought was much better because it had a better story. In fact, I got one more Sergio Leone Western movie coming up later on this list, which I much prefer than The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. It is worth a watch if you haven't seen it, but it's definitely not Clint's best movie ever. Okay, number 15, we have arrived in the year of 2018 with a movie called The Mule. And yes, I like this movie better than The Good, The Bad and The Ugly. Directed by and starring Clint at age 88. It's a crime movie. It doesn't do anything new, but it is pretty good to watch as modern movies go. Clint Eastwood as a filmmaker, by the way, his movies and his own directorial style are generally conventional. You don't expect him to go David Lynch, but he was skilled at what he did, and he was an efficient director. That was the case with a lot of the movies he directed, and this is also the case with The Mule, which he made in a seasoned old age. The Mule is a consistent movie. Not much filler material. It's more realistic compared to other Clint Eastwood movies. I think it's based on a true story, actually. And the cast is good. And Clint wasn't playing a tough guy in this movie. He was playing a quite gentle, old man who gets mixed up with the wrong crowd. This is something some people, including myself, like about Clint Eastwood. Every now and then, he likes to twist the conventions of his movies and his reputation as a cool, tough guy actor so he can expand his acting range and make good movies. I think more could have been done with the movie. I think there could have been more depth to some of the side characters, but the movie as it is has done its job. It may not be as majestic looking as The Good, Bad and Ugly, but it has a better story to tell. Number 14, jumping back in time to 1975, is Magnum Force. Certainly the best Dirty Harry sequel. The other Dirty Harry sequels are okay, but half the time those ones felt like episodes of a cop show. They have got some good scenes and one-liners, but they also got some terrible scenes as well, and the villains weren't as good as those seen in the first two Dirty Harry movies. Here in Magnum Force, it's enjoyable as a standard action movie. There are some very good scenes, some good dialogue, and the main cast is good. Magnum Force's story premise is perfectly good for a Dirty Harry sequel, but unfortunately it has little issues with the presentation and the logistics of some scenes. Some scenes I thought were a bit average or poorly scripted, and I personally think the finale where Clint goes against the rogue cops could have been done better. It was originally conceived by John Milius, who wrote the script for the first movie. He did the first script draft, but then Clint and others came aboard, they did some rewrites, and those rewrites resulted in some poor moments in the finished film. Also, Magnum Force pushed the apology message too hard at times, which confused some film critics when it came out. They thought this movie felt conflicted with its messages after seeing Clint's Harry Callahan character dishing out his own brand of justice in the previous movie. And I would kind of agree with that. Not that I think that Harry would not have believed in, man's got to know his limitations. But the way he said those kind of things in the film come off as if he's just saying those statements for the cameras, and for the critics. Although really, it's the critics who should have done the apologising. They branded the Harry Callahan character with a lot of antagonistic labels, which is sort of self-defeating when you compare him with the Scorpio psychopath villain he was fighting against. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. So Magnum Force, it really lacked the edge of the first Dirty Harry movie, and it just needed some finer touch-ups in the script and direction to become a genuine classic, but I still find the movie enjoyable as it is. Next up on number 13 is Every Which Way But Loose, the one where he had an orangutan sidekick. And it has a lot of crazy situations involving cowboy fistfights, police chases, neo-Nazi bikers, a bad-tempered elderly woman with a shotgun who is still learning to drive, among other crazy shenanigans. Critics didn't like this movie much, but it was a massive box office success when it came out. It's quite unusual as a comedy film in that it had overt comedy elements, but it also had a good serious drama storyline in the mix. It is a consistently enjoyable movie and the cast is good, and Every Which Way But Loose has a nice charm as well in that, contrary to this film poster, Clint is not playing a moody tough guy or a cynically minded action hero. His character here, Paulo Bedo I think his name was, he is streetwise and he can hold on his own, but he also has a nice warm presence to his character. He is a likeable guy in an everyday, casual kind of way. Yep, that's Every Which Way But Loose at number 13 of this list. Number 12 is In a Line of Fire from 1993. I wouldn't say it's a classic, but I always enjoyed it from start to finish. It's pretty well made, and its best scenes are well directed. The action scenes can be argued to be quite unrealistic in some ways, being that Clint plays an aging security officer. But hey, it's a Clint Eastwood movie. Decent cast, they are not outstanding, but they are serviceable. However, John Malkovich playing the villain, he was very good, and he and Clint played each other off well in this movie. Number 11, The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1976, directed by Clint. Some people really rate this movie, but I personally don't like it as much as the other movies we got coming up here. It doesn't do anything new, but it is enjoyable and consistent with some good moments and a handful of fairly strong scenes, and it tried to give the Josie Wales character more depth and semi-plausibility compared to Clint Eastwood's earlier gunslingers. However, the movie lets itself down quite a bit because some of the dialogue come off to me as sounding too scripted and very over-explanatory. I mean, moments like Josie Wales and his old Indian friend talking about the way Josie Wales took on a group of soldiers by himself by knowing who was going to shoot first and so on, those pieces of dialogue were alright for giving Josie Wales' fighting skills more credibility. But there is a number of other scenes where I thought characters verbally over-explain their backgrounds and their actions too much, which come off as sounding a bit too scripted to me. For that reason, it lacks the subtlety of Clint's better movies. Good movie anyway. Number 10. Some of you would laugh at me for including this, but this is actually a very good Western musical. Underrated, and yes, I like this better than The Outlaw Josie Wales and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Paint Your Wagon from 1968 with Lee Marvin. You wouldn't expect Clint to be singing in a musical, and Lee Marvin for that matter, but they really work well together in this movie. You know, some people don't like it because it's a different movie to what they expected. It hardly has any kind of action, and it has plenty of comedy. It's a long movie, the running time could have been trimmed down a bit, but it's got lots of good scenes and some nice charm to this movie. The humour is really good, and as musicals go, it has some pretty good songs. Lee Marvin's song Wandering Star was a hit single when it came out, and I also like Clint's song I Talk to the Trees. These are actually the actresses' real voices, and they sound really good in those songs. Yeah, Paint Your Wagon, go check it out. Next up, number 9 is another western called Unforgiven from 1992. Clint directed this, and it won a lot of praise. It won the Best Picture Oscar for that year. It's great that this movie openly twisted on the Wild West gunslinger mythology and how historical events and the gunslinger archetype were misrepresented and embellished in reports and fiction. And Clint plays an old gunslinger who is a very flawed guy, and he had a very nasty past. Unforgiven had some very good story ideas for a western, but good cast carried this film through, and there are some beautiful shots in this movie. Unforgiven had the potential to be among my top 5 choices, but unfortunately it didn't fully fulfill its potential. It did try something different, and it tried to have some strong drama, but whenever I watch it, the drama of a story doesn't feel strong enough for me. You know, the movie opens with a shocking scene where some arseholes try slicing at a woman's face that kicks off the whole story. It has that, but the violence and brutality that comes later in the film feels quite tame. And even though Clint's character had a nasty past, the circumstances of the story and his behaviour in the movie made him seem quite heroic in some ways, so I don't think the movie necessarily goes against his gunslinger archetype on screen, as some people claim. The movie did try to twist on the Wild West gunslinger mythology, but it sort of held itself back in places. Also, even though Unforgiven puts across very well of how over-dramatised and embellished the stupid tales of gunslingers are, the ending has a lot of the same stage dramatics and unrealism as the gunslinger tales. Clint Eastwood and Gene Hackman, they exchange dialogue in front of everyone in the bar in a manner that looks like a typical old-school western movie scene. And when the shootout begins with everyone shooting each other, a number of guys shoot at Clint, and they were at a good close range as well, but Clint's character doesn't get a scratch at all. And Clint's character in the ending scene only seems to ever shoot and kill the characters who arguably deserved what they got coming to them. The ending was good as it is, but I think it could have been a lot stronger if it was more realistic and if it accentuated the muddled morality of the situation. Have Clint's character be more merciless at shooting people who he doesn't like, perhaps in more sadistic ways, and have the ending shootout been a lot messier than what we got in this movie. with Clint being injured in some places. Yes, I am saying this even though Clint Eastwood movies are typically unrealistic, but Unforgiven promised a story that is more authentic and honest, so the ending felt a mismatch, a contradiction of its messages. Unforgiven is not Clint's best western, but it is an admirable effort and definitely worth watching. Definitely a good movie. Moving on, number 8 is Where Eagles Dare from 1968 with Richard Burton. This is a great spy adventure war movie, well scripted and well made. It has the same director of Kelly's Heroes. Again, this movie takes place in World War II. This movie does takes its time with its pacing, and it's quite a long film, but because timing is crucial to the movie's plot and it has some great scenes and twists, it kind of gets away with it. I initially put this as number 5 of this list, but when rewatching it, I ultimately consider this to be more of a Richard Burton movie. He is the main character of a story, and he has the most memorable standout scenes of a movie. However, Clint has his moments, and the whole movie is excellent regardless. Number 7 is Sergio Leone's For a Few Dollars More from 1967, another western. I'm in agreement with a number of people who say this is the very best of Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy. I like this better than The Fist for Dollars, and I like this better than The Good, Bad and Ugly. This movie has the best written story, the character interactions and the dynamics are better, some sharp interplays here and there. It is much more well-paced than The Good, Bad and Ugly, and most of the scenes are really good. It's old school in its execution, so it is not the most polished movie, but the central cast of this movie really deliver. Clint Eastwood, Lee Van Cleef, Guillaume Maria Volonté, he plays a bad guy, he has a great screen presence, and Klaus Kinski plays a bit part as a hunchback henchman. The main cast in this movie perfectly deliver their dialogue, and the non-verbal communication all the characters have with each other are effective. And this movie has a fantastic final showdown scene between Lee Van Cleef and Volonté, which tops the ending showdown of The Good, Bad and Ugly, and got there first before The Good, Bad and Ugly, by the way. Yeah, when we watch this scene, we know how the story ends. The good guy kills the bad guy. But the way the scene is done, the aesthetics and the craftsmanship, it's just sublime. For one thing, here in A Few Dollars More, there's a very personal revenge motive of Lee Van Cleef towards the bad guy. And unlike the music for the duel scene in The Good, Bad and Ugly, which sounds very playful, the music for the ending duel scene in For a Few Dollars More shifts emotional tones from potent sadness to epic empowerment. And the charming stopwatch blends in really well. Yeah, the whole movie is a classic. Number 6, getting back to the modern times, 2008 specifically, is Gran Torino. Clint directed and starred in this in his late 70s, and he's done a damn good job on this. When it came out, I remember some teenage friends in my school talked about how great this movie was, so Clint managed to connect with newer generations at that point. Really good story, plenty of really good scenes. It has a strong ending climax where you don't know what's going to happen the first time you watch it. And it really handles the racial issues well. Clint plays a character who says things that are culturally insensitive, but he also bonds and cares for his Korean neighbours, even though he throws racial jokes at them. And the movie got in of how people of different ethnicities can also be racist to each other as well. That movie was perfectly good for its day for how it handled racial issues. Whole cast is pretty good, not outstanding, but they are decently written and acted. Unfortunately, although the story is really good, I also thought some important side characters like the Korean boy who Clint's character bonded with didn't have enough character development. He is okay as he is in the film, but at times he comes across as if he's just waiting to be insulted or bullied. I do believe there was scope to improve the writing of some of the characters, and maybe have them being just as witty as Clint every now and then. Actually, one idea that could have been in the film is that, you know how Clint's character sarcastically jokes about his Korean neighbours eating dogs, which they don't? Well, the Asian boy could have just fired back on him by going up to a burger stand with him and offer him to buy him a hot dog. And they could even get into a discussion about why do Americans call these things hot dogs? It's a shame that the filmmakers didn't think of that, because that would have added further to the cultural element of a movie. Aside from little flaws here and there, Gran Torino is really good as modern movies go. Number 5, jumping back in time to 1979, is the prison movie Escape from Alcatraz. Awesome movie, very gritty, very moody, loosely based on true events. It was directed by Don Siegel, and we got a couple more movies of his coming up on this list. It takes artistic license with some of the real history details, but the whole movie and its historical recreations are believable. The cast is great, Patrick McGoohan is excellent as a prison warden, and those of you who are subscribed to my channel, you know that I've done a video on Patrick's series The Prisoner. It's interesting that he plays the opposite kind of character here in Escape from Alcatraz. Also among the cast is Fred Ward, great actor, and Paul Benjamin plays the leader of a black gang in prison, and he has a memorable scene with Clint where they throw racial insults at each other, but they do so in jest, and they become buddies. All of the acting in the film are perfectly good. There are some quite smart pieces of interactions, and there are lots of good scenes, some great moments. Yeah, I think there's more I could say about this movie, but it is best you just go check it out if you haven't seen it. It's brilliant. Number 4 is the first Dirty Harry film, another movie directed by Don Siegel. Most of you have seen it, it's great. Very bold movie, absolutely no nonsense with its messages. The wide appeal of this movie really shows in that people can just go in and watch it. We don't have to agree with all of its messages, but the story and the drama of it really pulls us in anyway. Great story that keeps up with its strong momentum throughout its runtime. The Harry Callahan character is iconic, and we perfectly understand why he does what he does, even if we don't approve of his conduct as a cop. The Scorpio serial killer villain, played by Andy Robinson, is very memorable. He is scary and funny in turns, and it is a shame that the film industry has largely avoided casting Andy Robinson in other movies because of how terrifying his performance was in this movie. In fact, although we can debate about its presentation of crime and punishment, Dirty Harry perfectly shows just how dangerous criminal psychopaths can be. The chaos and mayhem the Scorpio villain causes in this movie was an eye-opener back in the early 1970s, but since then, there have been tons of real-life crime cases involving psychopaths who were much, much worse than Scorpio in this movie. Anyway, the entire cast is perfectly fine. There's no bad acting at all. The movie has a really bruising atmosphere with its dark, gritty visual style, and Leo Schifrintz's musical score features some killer tracks. Compared to its sequels and imitators, those movies are more commercial friendly and less confrontational with their messages. Dirty Harry by comparison feels pretty raw in a good way. Yeah, Dirty Harry, the classic cop thriller of the highest caliber. Number 3 is yet another Don Siegel movie. This is an unusual one from Clint's filmography because it really broke away from Clint Eastwood's usual movie tropes. It's a very dark drama film rather than an action piece, but this movie is a very underrated gem. 1971's The Beguiled. It did get some good reviews, but it was a flop on release because it was poorly marketed as a standard Clint Eastwood action piece instead of a serious drama film, and Clint was pissed off about the poor marketing for that film. I'm not sure if audiences would have thought to see it anyway because it has some dark sexual themes and some very dark moments. And Clint plays a character who isn't a tough and smart gunslinger, he's just a regular guy who is a mixed bag of traits. You know, Clint Eastwood tends to play either good guys or what people call anti-heroes, as in he sometimes plays characters who do bad things, but he's still technically a good guy. Well, here in The Beguiled, he plays a guy who, at times he comes across as a guy who got himself mixed up in a bizarre situation, and at other times in the story he comes across as a bit of an arsehole. Actually, the other characters in the Beguiled story are like that too, and the movie really shows that it is not all black and white. There are lots of morally grey areas to many of the characters in this story, and that alone is quite unusual for a Clint Eastwood movie. As a drama film, the story is awesome. It has a number of interesting things and subtle details going on, there is plenty of depth to the characters, and it has a number of very strong, powerful scenes. The cast is excellent as well. The female cast who play the female boarding school crowd are all very, very good. And the big bonus point that shot this movie up to number 3 of this list is that this movie is the Clint Eastwood of his acting skills. If you ever meet anyone who says that Clint is a one-dimensional actor, point them to this performance in this movie. He absolutely shines with a strong variety of emotional displays and acting subtleties that we don't normally get to see from him in his other movies. The Beguiled is easily Clint's very best movie in terms of his acting. If I have one minor beef with the film, it's that the film features characters' thoughts being audible. They do serve to further the themes and the characters, but the way that they are placed in the film sometimes sounds out of place, and they sometimes break the immersion a bit for me. I think the characters' thoughts could have easily been communicated and presented on screen in other ways that are more natural and preferably more subtle. I prefer it if the meanings of the characters' behaviours are more felt than said. But aside from that, The Beguiled is Don Siegel's masterwork. Highly recommended. Number 2, switching emotional tone big time, probably the least expected choice to be number 2 of this list, but I'm quite firm with my choice. Another Clint Eastwood action comedy film, the sequel to Every Which Way But Loose, Any Which Way You Can. What? That's right, it's a great movie. Loads of fun from beginning to end. It's much better than the first film. When I first watched it, it really exceeded my expectations. There's a lot of slapstick humour and crazy situations and some hilarious jokes. It's fantastic as an off-the-wall comedy. And just like Every Which Way But Loose, Any Which Way You Can also had some very good drama scenes, especially those scenes involving the fist-fighting opponent's character played by William Smith. William Smith and Clint Eastwood were great together, and there's some very well scripted use of dialogue in the mix, which is quite surprising. But again, just like with Every Which Way But Loose, critics didn't like this movie. Out of all the entries of this list, I consider it to be Clint Eastwood's most critically underrated movie. It may not have the emotional punch of The Beguiled or Dirty Harry, but just for pure fun and entertainment, this one slams the ball out of the park. Even if you haven't seen the first movie, Every Which Way But Loose, I highly recommend you check out Any Which Way You Can if you haven't seen it. As a standalone movie, it's fantastic. And so, number 1, my favourite Clint Eastwood film of all time is the 1973 Western movie called High Plains Drifter. Friggin' awesome movie. It was only the second film Clint had directed, and he did a first-rate job on this. It's definitely his very best Western film, and alongside The Beguiled, this one has the most artistic depth and integrity. First time watching this in my teens, I remember being mesmerised with its really sinister atmospherics and its unusual storytelling. The basic premise is conventional. A mysterious stranger wanders into town and the locals ask him for help, but there is a lot of narrative and artistic twists thrown in as the story goes along, which makes it stand out as a Western, particularly the many hints that Clint's character is basically the ghost of a person in the town who was murdered. Also, the philosophical and moral messages of the story are presented in very underhanded ways. On the surface, it's your traditional Clint Eastwood Western story, but underneath it all, there is a rich, dark philosophy to the story, if you can make sense of it because it is not spelled out right, and some critics misunderstood the movie because it wasn't spelled out right. And that actually adds to the power of a movie because it gives a movie plenty of depth and a bit of rewatch value. Clint's direction and the cinematography are perfectly efficient. Many of the secondary characters are just as well written and acted as Clint's character. They have got their own character arcs in the story. The soundtrack is good with some weird, sinister musical tracks. It's very well paced, there's hardly any filler material, and there is a lot of effective and strong scenes. There is hardly anything bad I can say about this movie. Every time I watch this movie, I always really enjoy it. High Plains Drifter is a very dark movie, but it is nicely wrapped with good entertainment value, with some humour, and some quite positive undertones in the mix. For me, while The Beguiled has Clint's greatest acting performance, High Plains Drifter is Clint Eastwood's signature movie as a filmmaker. Swell, that is my list of top 80 movies starring Clint Eastwood, one of the most iconic individuals of modern human history, and a massive figurehead in the film industry, absolutely talented both in front and behind the camera. He's a legend in many people's minds. Before I go, I'll just put up on screen here the other Clint Eastwood movies that I have seen in my life, and all of these I just didn't consider good enough to put on this list. You might comment on having one of those on this list, and you might also mention some other ones I haven't seen. Well, thanks for watching. I'll catch you folks later down the trail. Now get off my lawn.